I'm Judith Y. I'm the Archives Chair for District 40. Today is December 1st, 2022, and I'm here with Kat. So Kat, would you introduce yourself? Tell me your
Sure.
home group and your sobriety date.
Yes. So my name is Kat Kay, and my home group is Practice These Principles, PTP, and it used to be in person, and it still is. And I'm doing more online than I'm doing in person because of my aging body. And it's hard to get up, but I have to say that I absolutely felt like when I walked in to PTP, I was feeling like I was going to be transformed. And that probably has more to do with me than it has to do with PTP, but it also has to do with every meeting can be different. And there's always one you can find that will work for you. We have basic suggestions of the 12 steps and 12 traditions. So my sobriety date is August 25th, 1985. So I have 37 years right now. This is how I got here. So I'm going to start with saying that a little bit about what it was like, what happened, and then what it's like now. And what it was like was I was an unhappy child. I was the only granddaughter and niece in the area where I was born. So I got a lot of attention, but I don't remember any of it. But apparently that was important, attention. I didn't do well in school, so I felt dumb. My father was quite critical. He forgot to tell you when you did well. I absolutely loved my father. And so I was always trying to please him, and it never seemed to be okay, good enough. So my father was the alcoholic in the family, and my mother was probably the codependent. And I just want to say for myself that I have both parts of that in myself. And I do go to Al-Anon because it helps me remember that I don't have control over the alcoholic or anyone else. So I had my first blackout without drinking when I was in 5th grade. I just would go away for a lot of time because I just apparently couldn't be in my life. And it was scary. I looked up at the blackboard and said, I don't even understand what's happening. Where did this come from? So that's kind of the way I grew up. I felt like God didn't give me the brains and brawn or whatever I needed. But I tried to be a really good little Catholic girl. I was raised Catholic, and I wanted to be a nun because I wanted to be a good person. In the meantime, however, I lied, and I got my way by lying and manipulating my brother and sister and not getting my way. So I'd stamp my feet. And I was what my father called me Sarah Bernhardt, which means you're over dramatic. And it was not okay in my family to be dramatic. It was important to be a nice, good person. My mother didn't always fulfill that role, and neither did my father, but that was what we were supposed to do. So what happened is I found alcohol. Well, when I was 14, I decided my parents used to have great parties. And I decided when I was 14 that I was going to drink, and that was going to solve my problems. I was going to have lots of friends, that I wasn't going to be poor like my parents, who weren't that poor, but around us, the rest of the family had a lot more. And I wasn't going to be a worrier like my mother. And I certainly wasn't going to be a drunk like my father. So that is how I walked into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous with all those things going on. I found solutions by drinking, and I had blackouts. I blacked out one time in class, and I flunked out because I was drinking and having fun. So probably a couple of just qualifiers. I remember that I used to ride with someone, and we always went to the pub before or after class. So we were in the pub and we were drinking pitchers of beer, which I didn't like, but it worked, at the time. Nobody was going to pay for my fancy drinks. And I went to the bar to get a new pitcher, and the bartender said, "The president just died. He was shot." And I said, "What president?" He said, "The president of the United States." So when I got back, I told everybody, and they said, "Oh, she's just drunk." So that's what people thought of me, even my drunk buddies. Well, what happened is I went on to try to fix myself. I have depression, which I didn't take care of and didn't even know I had. I did a lot of pretending. Everything was fine. I was very miserable a lot of the times, except when I'm drinking. But after a while, the drinking wasn't working as well as I wanted it to. And I was doing it more than just weekends. And I didn't want to be a drunk, so I didn't drink in the morning. And I had this brilliant idea that if I would smoke weed in the morning, that would take care of it. Well, that's only another depressive, as is alcohol. So I did that. And then, well, I got married and divorced. And when I was married, we weren't drinking. My husband was a gambler. I met him at a bar. And once we got married, we did not go out drinking. And so I white knuckled for 5 years. And then I had other relationships that were serious and a lot of fighting, a lot of trying to control and manipulate, and a lot of being miserable. The perfect thing was I blamed everybody else. When you blame everybody else, what I found out in AA, you can't make any changes if you're blaming someone, because they're not going to do it. You can only change yourself. And I didn't learn that in AA till I was sober for probably a couple of decades, and I'm still learning it, but I'm better. I had a boyfriend and we were doing cocaine at the time, and I had a drug dealer that I would sometimes go and take drugs to someone, and that helped me stay in money that I needed to drink and use. But I left that man and I started seeing this woman, and we just drank and drugged our way through life for about 5 years. And she left me, and she wrote me a note and said, and the woman was older than I was, and she said, "She's better in bed." And so I was devastated. It was like, oh my gosh. So after that, I decided to go back to school and get my degree in acting and drama. And I went to San Francisco University and I took a trolley. And when I took that trolley, I used to ride with a few other people on the trolley, right? And this woman was in a class that I was in. And she also was she was in a couple of classes as I was in. So we would talk. And she was the happiest person and she just seemed like really cool, and everything rolled off her back. And I'm like really tense. And I was cleaning houses at the time to support myself because I left my really good job because I wanted to drink. So I thought I'd be a bartender, but I ended up cleaning houses. And she just had something I wanted. And I asked her one day, "Why are you so happy?" And she said, I used to drink and I stopped, and it's been miraculous, and, more of that. So it ended up that I needed a roommate. And so she moved in with me, but she started smoking marijuana with me. And I would say, "Do you think I'm an alcoholic?" And she'd say, "Well, I really can't tell you that. You're the only one that can tell yourself that." So what happened was she came one day and said, "I'm dumping everything down the toilet. I had 7 years of sobriety and it's gone because I was smoking with you." And so I said, "Oh, okay, me too, And I was still drinking, and I realized now I can really quit smoking. And I tried all sorts of mixes and concoctions to make myself feel better, and nothing ever made me feel better. But I really liked hanging out with her. And so one day she was going to a dance and her friends were there and they were talking about it. And I was like, well, can I go to the dance? And she said, well, she said, you'd have to not drink or use any other mind-altering substances because it's an AA dance. And if you wanted to go, you'd have to go to the meeting first and, you'd have to be clean. And I said, okay, I can do that. So I got all ready. I'm going to go to this great dance. And I got there and I was shocked at how many people had so much sobriety when they did the countdown. There were thousands of people in that meeting, thousands. But when I thought, oh, I'm going to have fun at the dance, all I did was wander around looking for the people who must be on poppers or something. They weren't drinking and they weren't doing other drugs. So it must have been poppers. So I was pretty miserable. And that's how I got introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous. And 2 months later, in my misery, I decided to try Narcotics Anonymous and get off of weed because beer's a beverage. That's not my problem. So I go to NA, and the first day I'm there, they talked about reading some book, their NA big book that they got from Alcoholics Anonymous, helped to write. And I said, oh, well, I don't have a book. And they said, oh, we'll take this home and just bring it back next time you come. That was the first time I felt like anyone trusted me, because I did some illegal things too and thought, oh, this is a good way to get money. And I just was lucky I never got caught. So I went to the first meeting, and I went to a party the night before and I just couldn't drink soda pop. It was so sweet. So I had a beer. And I go to this meeting and they tell me, if you've had any mind-altering substances, please do not share. Well, I have a motor mouth. So I am sitting in a chair crying. And after the meeting, someone came up to me and they said, what's wrong? And I said, well, I drank and now I couldn't share. And they said, well, just come back tomorrow. I said, but beer's a beverage. I'm only here for weed. And they said, well, that's okay. And then a couple weeks later, the same story to different people, this woman said to me, if you want to stay here, maybe you should try to go to Alcoholics Anonymous and find out how not to drink, because it's a requirement here. And that's how I got introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I spent 5 years in both NA and AA, but I had a sponsor in AA. I had a boyfriend in AA who had an earring and long hair and a Triumph. So I got sober when I was 39 years old. And I have to say, I didn't like the God thing, but people hugged you. And the most important thing was people told me the truth. People shared in meetings the truth. Men cried. I'm used to a world that we lie and we cheat and we pretend we're not stealing, but we do. And I was feeling like enveloped in this warmth. But I still didn't like God, and I still didn't like it was harsh. I thought AA was harsh. So I got a sponsor, but I fired her because I was too whiny and crying, and she didn't want to listen to me. She'd say, I want you to get off the phone, and I want you to sit in your kitchen and look at your wall clock. And when 15 minutes is up, you can call me back. That was my first introduction to meditation. And it was the first time that I didn't have to call back. But, I didn't do it all the time, and I didn't really follow directions, and I was still full of blame, anger, resentment. But the good thing was I didn't drink, mental obsession, but I didn't have the terrible physical obsession that some people have. So I made sure I hung out with people that were not drinking, and that's all I would see is people that weren't drinking or drugging. And the relationship ended because neither of us were in that fit spiritual condition. But what it did is it took me to a lot of meetings because he went to meetings all the time. We went to dances, we went to parties, and we hung out with people that were sober. So my first step was very difficult. And I think I'm going to read step 1. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. Well, okay, I admitted I was powerless over alcohol, but my life was not unmanageable. An honest truth, I never believed that I had an unmanageable life till I was, oh, I don't know, in my double digits sober. I just totally forgot about it. I'm great at denial. So I'm miserable. And people are saying, well, you know, just do the steps. So I decided to admit that. But step 2, finding a God. Oh, no, God was terrible, punishing. God did a terrible thing to me when I was 17, just before I was 18. I went to a party and I drank hard liquor and I blacked out and I woke up having had sex with a man and I was a virgin. And I thought, that's it for God. God, I was a good girl. Well, sort of good. So that's when I started not caring how I acted or what I did to people or myself. But I was told that I could find a power that I could trust. So it was the ocean first, and nature is a lot to me. And I struggled with it. And my friend that got me sober said, well, did you know how the bottle worked exactly? And I was like, well, no. Then why do you have to know how or who this God is? And I thought, oh, that's good. I like that. So I could take the second step, and I did get another sponsor because I fired the first one. And I did these steps on my own, second and third, but I was miserable, miserable, miserable. And so I decided I needed to do a fourth step. It took me a year, and it only took me actually 2 weeks to do it. But it took me a year since my being afraid. So I want to say about fear, just pat yourself on the back. You're a wonderful person. We're all not junk. We were all born, to me, with grace. And whoever brought us into the world loved us and loved everyone else. And so we have something to rely on that will, well, keep me out of trouble, basically, because my trouble is that I want what I want, and I want it now. And so there was some patience to be had that I needed to learn in AA, and that also took me a very long time. So yeah, I did my fourth step actually with someone that I felt safe with in the rooms, but I didn't have a sponsor yet. And I never did the fifth column, the one that says, where am I to blame? She was wonderful. And she said, oh, I can see why you told me, because you seem so similar to my story. And that was it. And that's how people a lot of times treated me in AA. There were some harsh ones, and I took it on sometimes, but I have to say that it was the loving, caring people in these rooms that I gravitated to, even though I still wasn't very loving and caring. So in order to feel like I was really in AA, you know, I did the fourth step, but it felt great, but I decided I had to get a sponsor. And this woman was from Texas. She called everybody young tomatoes. You know, I thought she was pretty harsh, but she really had what I wanted. And so I got brave and asked her to sponsor me. And I'll just share a couple things she said to me that were, well, one thing, life-changing. One day I'm crying and complaining and whining because my boyfriend's in prison. Well, he's in jail, and it's not his fault. And it was, of course, but, you know, it was a gray area. So I am just miserable because I was with this guy and he was basically taking care of me, which is why I was with him. So she said to me, you know what? I really don't want to hear what your problems are. I don't want the record of the whole thing that went on. If you want the solution, I will tell you. And I hung up the phone. I was like, well, forget that. And so I called a couple other people that I know kind of didn't like her, so we could all rag about her. And so I did that. And so after a while, I'm just sitting on my couch and I'm just so tense and so upset. And I don't know what to do with myself. And I thought, maybe I should call this woman and ask her what she was going to tell me. And I called her up and she said, there's 3 steps for you to do. 1, 2, 3. And that is, first, ask for God's help. Second, say a prayer of your choice. And third, do the next thing in front of you. And fourth, repeat ad infinitum until you have forgotten what you are troubled about, what you are obsessed with. And to this day, that works like a miracle. It's a miracle. I had a lot of little miracles along the way in my sobriety. So I had done the 5th step without her, and I had done the 6th and 7th, and pretty quickly, like, yeah, right, okay, I got this. And I was on my amends steps, and so we were doing that. But I was getting pretty unhappy with my relationship, and I had had a female relationship before that, and she kept saying to me, well, she was giving advice, and the advice was, she says, I think you're a gay girl, and I don't think you should be with a man. Because in San Francisco, people did give you advice, sponsors and otherwise. And I know it happens, but I know also that sometimes it's helpful and sometimes it isn't. I love to give advice, and I have to be careful with my sponsees and other people not to give advice. Because that's how I mostly had sponsees when I was first sober, as I kind of looked to tell them what to do and how to do things. I have to backtrack because I have to say how I stayed in AA was, I was told by that first sponsor, go to a meeting as much as you drank. And I said, well, I didn't drink that much. Well, as much as you thought about drinking. So then I had to go every day. Pissed me off. She said, go to a meeting that's a big book study. Go to a meeting that's a traditions meeting. Find a home group, do service. And so I did those things spottily and not to the best of my ability. Well, now that I look at it, but it was to the best of my ability at the time, and nobody criticized me for it. I just did the best I could. But I was still not really in the 3rd step, like I didn't really trust God yet. So I took my will back lots of times. So my sister was pregnant with her first child, and they lived in Olympia, Washington, and I was invited up to join them. And by that time, I was 6 years sober, and I wanted to kill myself. And I didn't have that sponsor anymore, and I was still looking for another one. And, I just kept going to AA. So I got through it from a lot of help with people in Alcoholics Anonymous and a lot of suggestions that I tried to do. But there was lots missing yet from my journey into transformation. So I moved up to my sister and brother-in-law's, and it was great because now I wasn't living alone. Yeah, I got rid of the boyfriend. He got rid of me, whatever. I wasn't living alone anymore, and I had things to do. And this miraculous little person, I was there for her birth. So the thing I learned from her, lots of things, but the thing I learned from her was, one day I was sitting, and I didn't do much to help my sister. I went to meetings and I ran around and, had sponsees, but I would watch my niece at night, and I'm sitting watching television. She's on the floor, and she wasn't speaking, but she would get mad and cry about something around her toys. And I'm tired from work, and, I'm a lazy person, and I'm pretty selfish. And I jumped up and I got her the toy that she wanted. And I continued to do that. And I all of a sudden had a spiritual awakening. And I thought, this is what love is. This is what I had been looking for. And I never knew how to get it, except to try to get somebody to do everything for me. during that time, I met a woman in Olympia, and I got a really good sponsor. She had what I wanted, and I had never done a really serious sex inventory, so I did one with her, and I hung out. We did things together. She started a roundup in Olympia that I got to meet some amazing people, one of them whom was in this book. I got to stop for a minute and think where I'm at and where I want to be and talking to you so that I can send a message of hope and a message that you don't have to be perfect. You're not going to ever do everything right all the time. Sometimes I look bad. Sometimes I'm embarrassed. Sometimes I don't want to call anybody, even my sponsor. Sometimes I want to sit in my shit instead of